So let's discuss combinations between the first and the 10th house. So in other words, if you're putting the first lord in the 10th house with the 10th lord in the first house, or if you're having the first and 10th lords join somewhere or mutually aspect each other, or if you know your house DNA code and you have a 1 followed by a 10, or a 10 followed by a 1, or a 1 and 10 on opposite sides of the code. In any of those cases, you have a combination of the first and the 10th house, and it's going to be relevant to what we talk about in this video. If you don't have your house DNA code, you can get it because it's available in my report, The Houses of Life, which you can get at victigara.com/H. H for house. All right, let's first of all talk about the houses and then explain how they vibe together. So first of all, when you have the first and the 10th house, you're dealing with the sunrise position, which is the first house, and the overhead or the open sky position, which is the 10th house. And because the first house is the sunrise, it has its root of its symbolism, which is that it begins things and things become visible here in the first house because it's the place of the sunrise. And conversely, because the 10th house is the open sky, that forms the root of the 10th house's symbolisms. And the two roots of that is that the 10th house is a very visible place, and it's also the place of wind. So you could see right away that if you're going to combine the first and the 10th house somehow, they're both about places of visibility. The first house is where things become visible, and the 10th house is where they achieve their highest visibility. So this is going to be a good thing. This other bit about beginnings, this first house signifies beginnings, that's actually going to play at a bit of odds with the fact that the 10th house is the place of the wind. And I'll explain why. It'll become clear why as you know more about the symbolism that results from these basic symbolisms. So let's talk about that first. Starting with the first house and starting with the fact that sunrise means beginning of the day, beginning of a cycle. So therefore, if you cast a chart for some person, then the first house signifies that person's beginning. So in other words, it signifies their birth. Furthermore, the first house, because it is the beginnings, therefore it is the birth, and therefore it is the thing which is born. So the first house signifies the body, and the body is the focal point for the self. Hence the bottom line of what the first house represents is self. It represents self because it represents body. It represents body because it represents birth. It represents birth because it represents beginnings. It represents beginnings because it's the sunrise. It's where the sun rises. So that's one line of meaning in the first house. The other thing about the first house is the sunrise is where things become visible, and hence the first house signifies things coming into view, things becoming visible. So it signifies manifestation, the ability to make things real, the ability to bring things into being, tangibility, making things solid, being productive, being able to produce things. That's all reliant on the first house. And because it represents visible things and also represents the self, then it specifically represents the visible aspects of self. So some of the key things that are included in that is the body, but the body has its particular characteristics of how it behaves. So you'll see a person's behavior patterns or character from the first house. You'll see their skills and weaknesses, and you'll see their health and illness, etc. And that is basically everything that the first house represents. All the little minor things that it may represent are just some kind of a subset of these basic things. Now, let's fill out more detail on the 10th house. If you go over to the 10th house, and we see it's the open sky, so it's the most visible area. What does that mean? It's not where the sun is rising coming into visibility, it's actually the highest visible point. So the 10th house represents what I call the extraverse, the external aspect of the universe, the extraverse. And it also has the tendency, the 10th house has our tendency to extrovert. It means to put things into the external world. So the 10th house signifies extroverse. It means society, the world outside your window, the world outside yourself, the world outside your door, the public. Because it signifies public and society and all that, it also signifies what you do in public, what you do in society. So in other words, your career. Results you get from your career will therefore also be seen from the 10th house. So it's not just career, but it's status and fame and recognition and all that sort of stuff. How visible are you? How noticeable are you? Hence, since it indicates your status or your rise to visibility or power, it signifies power and influence over the public world. So it signifies an ability to command and to dictate and to order. So it's the house for authority and father figures. Now the other aspect of the open sky is not just that it's very visible, but also it's very windy or vapid, empty. So because of the wind nature of the 10th house, the airy nature of the 10th house, it's considered to be a place of movement, and hence it signifies travel. Hence, not stability means instability, right? What specific kind of instability? It's like evaporation. This is where the sun is very strong and very hot. Things will dry out very quickly when the sun is in the 10th house. So the 10th house has this ability to make things disappear, oddly. Even though it's the most visible point, it causes other things to disappear, or it causes other things to scatter because it blows them in the wind. So this is where I'm saying it's a bit different than the first house. The first house is clearly causing manifestation and tangibility and production, whereas the 10th house is causing evaporation and disintegration and scattering things. So there's basically going to be a harmony between the first and 10th house on the topic of visibility, but also a dissonance on the topic of solidifying versus desolidifying. So let's look at that in a bit more detail. Because the 10th and the first house both signify visibility, if you have a chart for a person with connections between the first and the 10th house, then it certainly indicates the person has high visibility. And what does it mean that they have high visibility? It means they're not unrecognized, they're not unseen, they're not unnoticed. They're going to be noticed. Hence, we can infer about their character is that they're assertive. They're confident and comfortable with extroverting themselves. So they can assert or extrovert themselves and express confidence. And when you express confidence, you get followers. You get people that believe in you and do what you say. They tend to have people believe in them. They tend to have people trust them, follow them, listen to them. They tend to be assertive and comfortable giving commands and orders. And they are comfortable with spotlight. They're comfortable with attention. It gives success and recognition in career because you feel assertive, you're confident, and extroversive. So that's the basic thing that you need to keep in mind when you want to interpret the synergy between the first and 10th house, the synergy on visibility. It's going to make a visible person, which means an assertive person, a confident person, a successful or recognized or followed person. So they tend to kind of rise up in power. Now on the other end, there's the issue that the first house has to do with production and manifestation and bringing things into tangibility, but the 10th house has to do with instability, destabilizing, and evaporating things, scattering things. And this is a dissonance rather than a harmony. So what you will expect from this is the person will be very productive. because the first house is involved, so there's a lot of productive energy in here and making things visible. But the 10th house is undoing the production. So you'll have a person that's very productive, but they have what we'll call a rapid production cycle. They bring things into being, and then those things get used up, and they replace it right away with the next thing that they bring into being. So this is the nature, actually. It does go together with the synergy of being highly extroversive. To be highly extroversive means you're putting out a lot of things into the external world. The external world just evaporates those things. But the way that you are good at extroverting is you continue to place things into that environment. So another key word here might be that they have non-enduring products, but they continuously replenish the non-enduring products. Now, I want to say a word or two about the different variations on the ways that you can get connections between the first and the 10th house. So if you have the first lord going into the 10th house, it's going to highlight this dynamic differently than if the 10th lord goes into the first. If you have first lord go into the 10th house, then you're going to see more of an emphasis on the visibility synergy. 10th lord in the first house, you get more of a high visibility, assertive, confident, successful, recognized person. And this will also happen if you have 1 and 10 in sequence in the DNA code, especially in that order, 1-10. If you go the other way, where instead of the first lord coming to the 10th house, you have the 10th lord going to the first house, then you're going to see the other polarity is more influenced. The production versus evaporation clash is going to be more dominant. And the visibility thing will come second. So that's where you'll see more of an emphasis on the person they get a bit exhausted because they keep putting their energy into something that keeps using up their energy. So that would be the case with the 10th lord going first house, or 10-1 in order in the codes, likely. Or definitely if you have 1 and 10 on opposite ends of the code. Other ways of combining the 10th and first lord, like through mutual aspect or through conjunction, will really depend a lot on the houses in which the lords are placed, but you basically will see more of the visibility synergy than the production dissonance. So I hope that helps you understand a lot about the first and the 10th house and how to interpret their combinations. And thanks a lot for watching.